I'm 34 years old, and if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you I was the luckiest man alive. I had a steady job, a decent apartment, and then one evening at a friend's party, I met her. She wasn't the most talkative person in the room, but she didn't need to be. People seemed to orbit around her without her even trying. The way she smiled, the way she tilted her head just enough to look like she knew something you didn't, it was magnetic. When our eyes met across the crowded room, she gave me this half-smile, like a secret invitation. It felt like I had been chosen. She came up to me later, drink in hand, and asked, "So, are you always this quiet, or do I just make you nervous?" I laughed, awkward, but she leaned in closer, brushing her hair back from her face. "Don't worry," she said softly, "I like men who don't try too hard." That's how it started. The first months were intoxicating. She was affectionate, funny, always surprising me with sudden texts, "Get dressed. I want to go out." Or she'd call at midnight and say, "I can't sleep. Come over." It felt spontaneous, exciting, like she had torn me out of my dull routine and thrown me into a movie where I was finally the main character. My friends told me she was amazing. My parents said she was charming. Everywhere we went, she seemed to shine, drawing compliments, attention, admiration. And every time someone told me how lucky I was, I felt it. But little things began to gnaw at me. She liked to tease me, and at first I thought it was playful. "You're really going to wear that shirt?" she'd say, laughing. "Your friends are kind of boring, aren't they? Don't work too late, you're not exactly CEO material." Always with a smile, always with that soft laugh that made me wonder, was it a joke, or a cut disguised as one? If I pushed back even slightly, she'd pout and say, "God, can't you take a joke?" Or worse, she'd get quiet, icy, and I'd feel like I had ruined everything by not laughing along. But the good moments outweighed the bad. At least, that's what I told myself. The late-night drives, the trips we planned, the way she'd look at me sometimes when I least expected it, like I was the only man in the world. Those were the moments that hooked me, that made me ignore the rest. Yet even in those moments, there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite place. A sharpness. Like she wasn't just looking at me, but through me. Measuring. Calculating. I brushed it off. Told myself I was overthinking. She was perfect, wasn't she? Everyone said so. But at night, lying awake beside her, I started asking myself a question I couldn't shake. What if the version of her that everyone adores is just a mask? At first, I thought her sharp comments were just part of her personality, witty, confident, maybe even a little too honest. But slowly, they started cutting deeper. One night we were supposed to meet my friends for dinner. I was excited, it had been a while since we all got together. When I told her, she rolled her eyes and sighed. "Do we really have to? Your friends are exhausting. They talk about the same boring things over and over. I'd rather stay home." I insisted, and she came, but the entire night she barely spoke. She scrolled through her phone under the table, smirked when someone shared a story, and later, as we walked back to the car, she said, "You see? I was right. They're losers. And honestly, when you're with them, you act like one too." Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. My friends had been in my life for years, long before her. But after that night, I noticed myself canceling plans more often. Subconsciously, I was avoiding the look she gave me whenever I mentioned them, that sharp, dismissive glare that made me feel ashamed for even wanting to see the people who had once felt like family. Then came the small criticisms, hidden behind that sing-song voice of hers. "You're really wearing that tie? You look like you're going to a funeral. You laugh too loudly. It's kind of embarrassing sometimes. Don't order that. It makes you look cheap." Each jab was small, so small that I almost convinced myself they didn't matter. But they piled up. And every time she followed it with that laugh, the one that made it sound like I was the crazy one for taking it seriously, I forced myself to smile. Because arguing only made it worse. If I protested, she'd tilt her head and sigh. "God, you're so sensitive. No wonder people think you're difficult. I'm only trying to help you." It was brilliant, in a way. She never called me names directly. Never outright insulted me. Everything was disguised as a joke, or a suggestion, or help. But the effect was the same. Piece by piece, my confidence was being dismantled. The disappearances started small. A late night at work. Drinks with a colleague. A yoga class that ran late. All perfectly reasonable on their own. But the excuses multiplied, and the timelines never matched. One evening, she told me she was going to dinner with a female coworker. Hours later, she came home glowing, not tired from girl talk, not carrying leftovers, but radiant in a way I hadn't seen in months. Her lipstick was perfect, her perfume stronger than usual, and when I asked how dinner was, she said, "Fine," before disappearing into the bathroom. I tried not to dwell on it. But the next morning, I noticed her receipt in the trash. 2 glasses of wine. A restaurant we'd never been to together. No sign of her friend's name anywhere. When I asked her about it later, she didn't hesitate. She smirked, leaned against the counter, and said, "You're checking my trash now? That's pathetic." Then she kissed my cheek and walked away. She began pulling away in other ways too. Our Friday night routines, movies, takeout, just us, started disappearing. "I'm busy. I'm tired. Maybe next week." But when I suggested we go out together, she laughed. "Do you really think I want to be seen in that cheap little diner again? You need to raise your standards." So we stopped going. And the distance grew. What disturbed me most wasn't her lies or her cruelty. It was the way she seemed to enjoy it. There were moments when she'd look at me after one of her comments, waiting, watching, almost hungry to see how I'd react. If I got angry, she'd laugh and say I was overreacting. If I got quiet, she'd smile and lean in to kiss me, like rewarding a dog for obeying. One night, as we lay in bed, she whispered, "You know, sometimes I wonder how far I could push you before you'd actually snap." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. She giggled softly and buried her face in the pillow. "Relax. I'm joking." But I knew she wasn't. It was around this time that I realized she wasn't careless. She wasn't simply cruel by accident. Everything she did was calculated, every comment, every absence, every smirk. She was testing me. Watching me. Seeing how much I could take before I broke. And as I stared at the ceiling that night while she slept soundly beside me, a terrifying thought formed in my mind. What if all of this, the lies, the jokes, the little cuts, is only the beginning? I used to tell myself I would never be that kind of man, the one who snoops, the one who checks phones, digs through drawers, stalks his own girlfriend. That wasn't me. That was pathetic. That was exactly the image she wanted me to become, paranoid, insecure, unstable. But the lies had been piling up. Too many yoga classes that ended hours later than they should. Too many dinners with friends that left no photos, no names, no traces. Too many smirks when I asked an innocent question. And always that same refrain, "Relax. Don't be so sensitive. You're imagining things." So one night, while she slept soundly beside me, her breathing calm and steady, I reached for her phone on the nightstand. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would wake her. My hands shook as I entered her passcode. I'd seen it 100 times. Her birthday, reversed. The screen lit up, and suddenly I was staring at her world, a world she never meant me to see. The messages were what broke me. At first, I told myself maybe I'd just see harmless chats, maybe I'd find nothing, maybe I was crazy. But within seconds, my worst fears were confirmed. There were threads with names I didn't recognize. Men's names. Some with emojis beside them, hearts, flames, smirking faces. Daniel. Alex. Even one saved only as P. Redheart. I scrolled with trembling hands. Flirty texts. Late-night arrangements. Compliments about her dress. Jokes about me. One line burned into my skull. He suspects something, but it's fun. He won't leave. He's too weak. And her reply. Of course he won't. He needs me. I think he likes the pain. My stomach twisted. I couldn't breathe. I should have stopped, but I couldn't. I kept scrolling. There were photos too. Not explicit, but intimate enough. Glasses of wine clinking. Her smile, wide and radiant, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Her leaning into a man's shoulder, his hand barely in frame. Hotel lobbies. Restaurants I'd never been to with her. Different men. Same pattern. Same game. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to shake her awake and scream in her face. But instead, I just sat there in the dark, frozen, my chest hollow. There was no shock. Only confirmation. I had known all along. Carelessness? No. This wasn't carelessness. She had wanted me to find this. The half-hidden notifications, the lipstick that didn't match, the scarf left on the chair. It was bait. All of it. I put the phone back exactly as it was and lay down again, stiff as stone. She stirred in her sleep, rolled over, and pressed herself against me like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just gutted me. And then, half asleep, her lips brushed my ear and she whispered. You'll never leave me. You can't. My blood ran cold. Did she know I had looked? Or was it just another perfectly placed dagger, timed to pierce me in the dark? The next morning, she was radiant again. Coffee brewing, hair flawless, humming as if the night before had never happened. She kissed me lightly, asked about my day, and smiled. I smiled back, but inside, something had broken. That evening, I searched again. Not her phone this time. Her desk. Receipts. Bills. Random clutter. And then, tucked away in the back of a drawer, a slim black notebook. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. Page after page of notes. About me. Confronted me about perfume. Denied. Reaction, frustrated but apologetic. Good. Mentioned Mila again. He doubted himself. Perfect. Next step, Daniel. Watch closely. She had been documenting me. Studying me. Every reaction, every doubt, every hesitation was written down like data in an experiment. I wasn't her boyfriend. I wasn't even her victim. I was her subject. I shoved the notebook back into the drawer when I heard the door open. She walked in moments later, her eyes scanning me instantly like always, searching for cracks. She smiled, poured herself wine, and sat across from me. You look tired, she said softly. Long day? I forced a smile. Yeah. Just work. She tilted her head, sipping slowly, and whispered. Sometimes I wonder how far I can push you before you finally snap. She smiled as she said it. And in that moment, I knew, she wasn't hiding anything because she didn't need to. This wasn't just cheating. This was a game. And I was the rat in her maze. I couldn't keep pretending. The phone, the photos, the notebook full of her cruel little observations, they spun in my head like knives. I told myself if I confronted her calmly, if I showed her what I had found, maybe it would finally break through her mask. Maybe I'd see even a flicker of guilt. So I waited. That night, she came home late again, perfume heavy in the air, a new glow on her skin. She tossed her bag on the chair and gave me that smirk, the one that always said, I know something you don't. But this time, I was already at the table. Her notebook lay in front of me. She froze for half a second, then smiled wider, like she had expected this all along. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady but my chest burning. She tilted her head, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat across from me. About what? She asked sweetly. I tapped the notebook. About this. About the lies. The perfume. The names. The games you're playing with me. She glanced at the notebook, then back at me, and her smile sharpened. So, you've been snooping. I've been surviving, I said. Her laughter filled the room, loud, sharp, mocking. Surviving? No. You've been spying, obsessing, proving exactly what I've been writing down. You sound paranoid, unstable. And you think this is your big win? She leaned in, her eyes glittering. All it proves is that you're pathetic. My fists clenched under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. It proves you've been studying me like I'm your lab rat. Every reaction, every word, every silence. That's not love. That's cruelty. She sipped her wine slowly, never breaking eye contact. Then she set the glass down and said coldly, and if I was? If I was testing you, pushing you, seeing how far you'd bend? Maybe you should be grateful. Maybe without me, your life would be nothing. Her words cut deep, but worse than the words was her calmness. She wasn't denying it. She was admitting it openly, flaunting it, because she thought it didn't matter. You don't get it, do you? She whispered. Even if you tell someone, even if you show them all of this, who will they believe? You? The man with wild eyes, full of paranoia? Or me? The calm, charming woman who smiles, who everyone adores? I leaned forward. The lies will rot. And when they do, even the best mask will crack. For just a second, I saw it, the tiniest flicker in her eyes. Doubt. Fear. Then she smiled again and leaned back, as if nothing had happened. I stood, took the notebook, and walked to the door. Behind me, her voice followed, soft and poisonous, "You'll come back. You always do." I didn't answer. But her words echoed in my skull all night, twisting tighter and tighter, "You'll come back. You always do." After that night, when I laid her notebook on the table and she laughed in my face, something inside me finally broke, but not the way she wanted. I didn't explode. I didn't scream or throw things. I didn't hand her the meltdown she was desperate to record in her twisted diary. Instead, I felt something else. A strange, icy calm. I realized she had rehearsed for every reaction I could possibly give her. If I shouted, she'd call me unstable. If I begged, she'd call me weak. If I walked away, she'd tell everyone I had abandoned her. She had written the script, cast herself as the victim, and handed me the role of the villain. But what she never expected was this, that I could refuse to play at all. So the next morning, I came back home like nothing had happened. I kissed her cheek, let her pour me coffee, smiled at her little jokes. When she searched my eyes for cracks, for anger, for paranoia, I gave her nothing. Just calm. Just silence. And in that silence, I started to plan. I bought a second phone. Cheap, hidden. She never saw it. On it, I began storing everything, recordings of her late-night calls where she bragged about pushing me until I break, scans of the notebook pages where she cataloged my reactions like an experiment, photos of the receipts she thought I'd never notice. I started making backups. A hidden email account, a USB drive stashed in my brother's garage, even a safety deposit box at the bank. She had her story, but I was building mine, not with words, but with proof. Cold, undeniable proof. Meanwhile, I perfected the mask. When she came home late, I asked about her day with a gentle smile. When she left a man's scarf on the chair, I picked it up, folded it neatly, and set it aside. When she deliberately left her phone face up, a message glowing with a string of hearts, I didn't flinch. "You don't even care anymore, do you?" she spat one evening. I smiled. Of course I care. But my voice was calm, too calm. And that calmness terrified her more than anger ever could. The provocations grew more desperate. One night, she walked in with a bouquet of lilies, dramatic, fragrant enough to choke the air. She set them on the table and looked at me expectantly. "Someone gave me these," she said. "Don't you want to know who?" "They're beautiful," I answered. "Let's put them in water." Her jaw tightened. She slammed the vase down so hard water spilled across the table. "You're pathetic," she screamed. "You don't even love me." I cleaned up the spill in silence. She stood there shaking, waiting for me to react. But I didn't. Another time, she left a gold watch on the nightstand. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, and placed it back. She was watching me closely. "Well?" she demanded. "Nice piece," I said calmly. "Expensive." She threw the watch into her purse and stormed out of the room, furious. But the moment that told me I was finally winning came late one night. I overheard her in the kitchen, her voice low and bitter as she spoke on the phone. "He doesn't react," she hissed. "I've tried everything. Nothing works. He just stays calm." There was a pause, then I heard her say quietly, "It's boring now." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Because that single word, boring, told me everything. I had starved her of what she craved most, my chaos, my breakdowns, my humiliation. She was addicted to my reactions, and without them, she was withering. But I also knew this was the most dangerous stage. Because a predator that's starving doesn't stop hunting, it becomes reckless. So I stayed calm. I stayed silent. And in the shadows, I sharpened my knives of truth. If she wanted a war, she was about to get one. For a while, I thought I had finally figured it out. The silence, the calm, the mask I wore, it unsettled her more than any argument ever could. I saw the frustration building in her eyes every time I refused to play along. She wanted chaos. I gave her nothing. And that nothing began to poison her from the inside. But predators don't simply collapse when they starve. They thrash. They bite. They escalate. It started small. She stopped hiding her contempt behind smiles. One evening, she came home, her phone in her hand, and placed it on the table face up. A man's name appeared on the screen with a line of heart emojis. She didn't even glance at it. She just poured herself wine, sat across from me, and said, "You don't even ask anymore." Isn't that strange? Most men would want to know who I'm with. I sipped my drink calmly and said, "If you want me to know, you'll tell me." Her lips curled. "That's not normal." "You pretending not to care?" "That's pathetic." I didn't reply. And that silence drove her mad. The provocations grew. A stranger's scarf appeared on the back of her chair. A lighter I'd never seen before was left in her coat pocket. Once, she even put a man's watch on the nightstand, carefully positioned so I couldn't miss it. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, and set it down without a word. She was watching me like a hawk. "Well?" she snapped. "Nice piece," I said. She grabbed the watch, stuffed it into her bag, and stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. But she wasn't done. One night, I came home to find her sitting at the table with papers spread out neatly. Her smile was too wide, too polished. "You've been busy," she said. "So have I." She pushed the papers toward me. Affidavits. Drafts of statements. Fabricated stories that painted me as paranoid, unstable, even dangerous. She had been rewriting the narrative, preparing to take her little experiment outside our four walls. "All it takes is one judge," she whispered. "One officer. And this becomes the truth." My stomach twisted, but I stayed calm. I slid the papers back toward her and said quietly, "Then let's see what happens when the lies rot." For just a moment, her mask cracked. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw it, fear. A few days later, the knock on the door came. 2 officers. Polite, professional. They asked if everything was all right at home. Had there been arguments? Raised voices? Had I ever lost control? I answered calmly, firmly, but I could see it in their eyes, doubt. Someone had planted the seed. And I didn't need to guess who. When the door closed, I turned to see her standing in the hallway, arms folded, a faint smile on her lips. She tilted her head, mouthed 2 words, and walked away. Your turn. That night, she didn't whisper taunts in the dark. She didn't smile. She just sat in the living room, staring out the window, glass of wine in her hand. But I knew better. She wasn't retreating. She was recalculating. And as I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized the game had entered its final stage. This wasn't about her jokes anymore. Or her smirks. Or her fake roses and scarves. Now it was about survival. And if she wanted war, I had no choice but to finish it. The visit from the police should have broken me. Months ago, it would have. I would have raged, shouted, defended myself, and given her exactly the scene she wanted. But instead, I felt calm. Because I knew what she didn't, I had been collecting. Quietly. Patiently. Meticulously. She thought she owned the story. She thought she had painted me into the role of the paranoid, unstable boyfriend. But the whole time, while she laughed and documented my reactions, I had been documenting her. Every word. Every smirk. Every slip. And now, it was time to let her see a glimpse of the arsenal she had created for me with her own hands. It happened on a Thursday night. She came home late, as always, heels clicking across the floor like a countdown. She didn't even bother with excuses anymore. She poured herself wine, leaned against the counter, and smiled at me like a queen addressing a servant. Rough day? She asked sweetly. I smiled back. Not as rough as yours is about to be. Her eyebrows arched. Oh? And what does that mean? I reached into the drawer, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the table. She frowned, curious, and opened it. Inside were copies. Her notebook entries, scanned line by line. The transcript of her late-night call, he's calmer now. Next week we'll have enough. I'll file, and it'll be clean. And a few photos, her with other men, her radiant smile captured in places she told me she'd never been. She stared at the papers in silence. For the first time, her hand trembled. Finally, she looked up at me. Her voice was thin, almost whispering. So you've been keeping score. I leaned back, calm, steady. No. I've been surviving. But now? Now it's your turn. Her mask cracked. She tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. This proves nothing. People won't care about your creepy little folder. They'll just see you, paranoid, obsessed, a man spying on his girlfriend. And they'll see me. Calm. Charming. Believable. Who do you think they'll believe? I took out my phone and pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. Her laugh, sharp and cruel, he'll crack soon. I can't wait to see it. The recording echoed off the walls. And for the first time, she looked rattled. That, I said quietly, isn't my paranoia. That's you. Your words. Your mask slipping. And when the time comes, that's all I'll need. She stood abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. Her glass shook in her hand. You won't dare use it, she spat. I stood too, tucked the envelope back into my bag, and looked her dead in the eye. I already have. Copies are safe. Even if I vanished tomorrow, your mask would still fall. Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since I had known her, she had no script. No prepared lines. Just silence. And that silence, her silence, was the loudest victory I'd ever heard. That night, she didn't taunt me. She didn't smirk. She just sat in the dark living room, staring out the window, glass of wine untouched. I watched her reflection in the glass, and I knew she finally understood. The prey she had been studying, mocking, and torturing had learned how to hunt. After that night, the air in our apartment changed completely. The silence between us wasn't the same anymore. Before, it had been her weapon. She used it to make me doubt, to make me chase her attention, to punish me when I didn't react the way she wanted. But now? Now the silence belonged to me. She felt it too. I could see it in the way she moved, restless, unsettled, pacing like a predator that had just realized the prey wasn't running anymore. She started showing her teeth. No more careful lies, no more sweet tones. She flaunted everything openly, daring me to react. One evening, she came home laughing loudly into her phone. She didn't hang up when she walked in. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe, still talking to him, her voice dripping with affection, almost exaggerated. Tonight was perfect. We should do it again soon. Then she locked eyes with me and smiled while she ended the call. She set her phone on the counter, face up, so I could see the thread of messages lighting up the screen. Hearts. Winks. Promises. But I didn't give her the explosion. I just closed my laptop, stood up, and asked, "Do you want tea?" Her smile cracked. The provocations escalated further. A man's lighter left on the table. A jacket draped over the chair that wasn't mine. One night she even walked into the apartment carrying a bouquet of roses, placed them in the vase in the middle of the table, and said, "A friend gave me these." She tilted her head, watching me carefully. "Don't you want to know who?" "They're beautiful," I said calmly. "I'll change the water tomorrow." The next thing I heard was the vase shattering against the wall. Water and roses scattered across the floor. She stood there breathing heavily, her face twisted with fury. "You're disgusting," she hissed. "You don't even care. You never cared." I picked up the broken glass in silence. But she wasn't just trying to provoke me anymore. She was preparing something bigger. One night, I came home to find papers spread across the table. Legal drafts. Statements. She had rewritten her diary of my reactions into fabricated reports. In her version, I was paranoid, unstable, dangerous. She looked up at me with a perfect smile, the kind that once fooled everyone else. "See? All it takes is one signature. One judge. One cop. And suddenly, your story doesn't matter anymore." I sat down across from her, my voice steady. "And what happens when your story rots from the inside?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but then she recovered, sipping her wine. "You think you've trapped me with your little recordings? They'll see you as obsessed. A man spying on his girlfriend. That's all it proves." I leaned forward. "No. It proves that the mask slipped. It proves what you really are. And when the time comes, your voice will betray you." She didn't take it well. The next day, the police came again. Another, concerned call. They asked the same questions. Did we argue often? Did I ever feel out of control? Did she seem afraid? I answered calmly, as always, but I could see it, the seed of doubt had been planted deeper this time. When they left, I turned to find her standing in the hallway, arms folded, her smile wide and sharp. She mouthed the same two words as before, "Your turn." But I didn't flinch. Because now, I wasn't the one on trial. She was. That night, I caught her trying to record me. She placed her phone on the counter, half hidden behind a bottle of wine, the screen dim but still recording. Then she suddenly raised her voice, shouting, "Stop yelling at me. You're scaring me." But I stood in silence. I walked over, picked up the phone, and stopped the recording. Then I pressed play. The only sound was my calm breathing. No words. No shouting. Just her voice, screaming into nothing. I placed the phone back on the counter. "Nice try," I said quietly. For the first time, she looked rattled. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the living room, staring out the window, glass of wine untouched. Her reflection looked broken in the glass. But I knew better than to think she was finished. No, a cornered predator is always the most dangerous. The difference now was simple. She wasn't the only predator in the room anymore. And she knew it. I knew the moment had come. For too long I had been patient, collecting, waiting, hiding behind silence. But silence is only powerful if you know when to break it. She had already brought the police to my door twice. She had tried to trap me with recordings. She had left her props scattered around the apartment like clues in a play, expecting me to scream, to break, to give her the ending she wanted. And every time I denied her that ending, she grew more desperate. Now it was my turn. It happened on a Monday night. She was already at the table when I got home, wine glass in hand, her phone propped up like always, recording, no doubt. Papers were spread out in front of her again, her fabricated reports, her invented episodes where I was the aggressor. She smiled as I walked in, the smile of someone who believed she still owned the story. "Do you want to see your future?" she asked sweetly, sliding the stack toward me. "This is what the world will know about you." I picked up the papers, leafed through them slowly. Lies, half-truths, twisted fragments. She had written me into the role of a paranoid, unstable man. And for a long time, that's exactly who I had become in her eyes. But not anymore. I set the papers down gently, reached into my bag, and pulled out an envelope. I slid it across the table, steady, calm. Her smile faltered as she opened it. Inside were copies of everything she thought she controlled. Her own notebook entries, page after page of cruel little notes documenting my reactions like I was a lab rat. Transcripts of her late-night calls where she laughed about how close I was to breaking. Photos of her with other men, radiant and careless. And a USB drive labeled simply, "Her voice." She stared at the contents, her face pale. After I showed her the envelope, after her face finally cracked under the weight of her own words, the apartment was never the same. The silence that followed wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. She still moved through the rooms with that forced grace, still poured her wine, still checked herself in the mirror, but the confidence was gone. Every glance she gave me was sharp, searching, like she was trying to read a script that no longer existed. For the first time, she was off balance. Days passed like that, and I could feel her unraveling. The provocation stopped. No more scarves or watches left behind. No more phone screens glowing with heart emojis. She had abandoned the little tricks because they no longer worked. Instead, she sat in the evening staring out the window, wine glass untouched, her reflection fractured in the glass. But I knew she wasn't finished. A woman like her doesn't just surrender. She recalculates. She waits. She looks for one last chance to strike. And she tried. It happened on a rainy night. I came home, and she was sitting at the table, her phone already recording. The moment I stepped inside, she jumped up and started screaming. "Stop yelling at me. You're scaring me." Her voice was sharp, frantic, desperate. But I didn't say a word. I stood there calmly, walked over, and picked up the phone. I stopped the recording, pressed play, and let her hear it, nothing but her voice, shouting into silence. Her face went pale. She reached for the phone, but I held it out of reach. "It's over," I said quietly. "You don't control the story anymore." She froze. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. The next morning, she started packing. Quietly. No dramatics, no tears, no begging. She folded her clothes with mechanical precision, slipped her jewelry into cases, lined up her cosmetics neatly. She zipped the suitcase, rolled it to the door, and paused. She turned to me, her face calm, her eyes sharp, and whispered, "You'll miss me. When the silence gets too loud, you'll wish I was here." Then she smiled one last time, that same poisonous smile that had once hooked me, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. For the first time in months, maybe years, the apartment was truly silent. Not suffocating. Not heavy. Just quiet. I sat at the table, the same table where she once spread her lies, where I once spread my evidence, where our war had been fought in whispers, stares, and silence. I closed my eyes and let the quiet wash over me. She was wrong. The silence wasn't my prison anymore. It was my freedom.